Anyone who's still playing Halo Infinite has probably realised that the weapons sandbox is about as stale as that slice of bread you've left on your kitchen side for the past week. That is not to say the weapons sandbox is bad by any means, far from it. In fact, I think Infinite's sandbox overall is pretty damn solid and one of the best in the franchise. We saw some pretty cool new additions, and almost every single weapon serves somewhat of a unique purpose, bar a few exceptions. And whether or not you like the weapons that are available, I'm pretty sure most of us can agree that the weapons sandbox is relatively diverse. And of course, we don't just have the normal weapons, as every weapon has a variant, but these aren't really super common. You only really get the opportunity to use these in Big Team Battle Fiesta, Campaign, or Forge modes and maps. Which is unfortunate because these weapon variants do add quite a bit of flavour to the sandbox. But even then, the game has been out for over a year at this point, so people are getting pretty tired. Over the course of this year, we've seen absolutely zero new additions. And although there's been some balance changes here and there, they haven't exactly been super common either. We did have the scrap cannon available on the Pit remake, and although the scrap cannon isn't a new weapon, this was the first time we'd been able to use it in multiplayer, and since it wasn't super common in campaign either, it was cool to have a new way to try out this weapon. And I think the scrap cannon is a super fun addition, and I love playing on that map just to use it. The only other weapon that isn't really available in any form of multiplayer is the plasma turret, so hopefully in future we get a Covenant or Banish themed map with that available. And we do know we're getting the bandit rifle in Season 3. And although I'm excited for the bandit rifle because it is a new weapon, I am disappointed that the first new weapon we're getting is another kinetic precision weapon, because did we really need more of those? And what's worse, if leaks are anything to go by, of course do take this with a grain of salt as it does stem from leaks, we might not be getting another weapon until Season 5, which means we're going to have to wait roughly 8 months before we get another new weapon. But I do believe there's a way that 343 can work around this and technically make some new additions to the sandbox without needing to create entirely new weapons every season. And I of course hinted to this earlier, this being the weapon variants. Now Halo Infinite isn't the first weapon to introduce weapon variants. You could argue the Scarab gun is the very first one present in Halo 2, or the golf club that's in Halo Reach Forge. Now the first game to flesh out the concept of weapon variants was definitely Halo 5, as every weapon had at least 2 variants, I believe. I mean, all the loadout weapons had different versions with scopes, or extending barrels, or extending mags, and all these different sort of versions of the weapons that could be pretty fun to use. You had the Nornfang, which was a version of the sniper rifle that permanently applied a damage boost as long as you were holding it, so basically every shot was a guaranteed kill. Or there was the Ad Victorium, a rocket launcher that fired 3 rockets at once and they would follow wherever you're aiming. Yes, some of these variants were absolutely insane, and we got new ones pretty regularly. Now the idea I propose is that after Season 3, 343 could try and implement 2 weapon variants every season. I'll of course talk about some concepts I have in mind for potential weapon variants, but right now I need to address the problem. Which is of course the fact that you don't really see these weapon variants very often. I'm also going to give you a fair warning now, you're going to get very tired of me saying the words weapon variants. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, the only way to really acquire any of them is by playing campaign on Forge stuff or on BTB Social. There is another option, which is whenever you play on the map Fragmentation and access the loot caves, that will always spawn 2. It's actually insane that Fragmentation is the only map with loot caves. I kind of wish that all of the BTB ones had them because they are a pretty unique feature and they are a pretty rewarding concept too. It adds another little objective regardless of what mode you're playing. You hack into a terminal, make your way inside the cave, and then boom, you've got some pretty damn good loot which could give your team an edge over the enemy players. And I'd really like to see these fleshed out a little bit more in future, or at least include them in more maps. But moving on, I feel like there's various other modes or various things 343 could do to make these variants more accessible. For example, give us an actual Super Fiesta playlist, both an arena one that could just be a part of the Social Slayer rotation, and then maybe just a BTB Fiesta playlist as we already have an Arena Fiesta playlist too. The difference being that the BTB one could always be Super Fiesta. It was super fun in Halo 5, and the fact that it isn't really in Infinite yet is insane. Technically, BTB Fiesta isn't even Super Fiesta anyway, it's just Fiesta except weapon pads spawn, so there's a chance that some of those variants will appear. There's no chance of actually spawning with them. And I feel like you could take it a step further and just implement more modes in the social playlists that make use of some of these variants, as you can really do some unique things with them. Imagine a game mode where everyone has bottomless clip, infinite ammo with the arcane sentinel beam. It would be pure utter chaos. Maybe on the Skockits game mode, you could have both of the variants of the skewer and the rocket launcher spawn in as power weapons on the map. As a whole, they're not necessarily going to be a huge improvement by any means, but there's still that power weapon to fight over, and they add a bit more flavour to the game mode. In fact, you could just maybe add some of these variants as power weapons on specific maps. If we take a look at the Haven remake, you'll notice that two of the power weapons on that map are the Striker Sidekick and the Heatwave variant, rather than your typical power weapons being the Sniper, Skewer, Rocket Launcher, Cinder Shot, Energy Sword, Gravity. And I'd like to see this done for some official maps too. Maybe sometimes instead of the S7 or the Skewer, it can be the version of the Shock Rifle. Or in fact, since BTB every single map has those weapons that drop down in the little drop pods, why not just have it where there's like a 1% chance of some of those being weapon variants? It would be a very, very small chance, but there's still a chance. And again, this would add some much needed variety. But that's enough talk about how you can find the variants. Let's talk about some ideas for new ones they could add. So right now, every single weapon in Halo Infinite has at least one variant. That's with the exclusion of the turrets. Every normal weapon has at least one variant, with the hammer and energy sword both having two. In the campaign, there is two ways to acquire these. Some of them are unlocked through the Valor system, and the rest are unlocked by taking down HVTs, which stands for High Value Target. These are the mini bosses that you fight in the campaign. Every single one of these weapon variants gives the weapon a special addition, a new ability if you will, and some of them just feel like completely different guns. You have the Volatile Skewer, which is just the skewer, but it explodes. But then you have the Flexfire Sniper, which is a sniper rifle with a larger reticle, 10 rounds in its ammo clip, a faster rate of fire, but with reduced damage. This is one of my favourite weapons to use in the game, and funnily enough, if you combine this with something like the Assault Rifle in Forge with the scripting tool, you basically create a gun that has aimbot, as it expands the reticle that much that anyone on your screen is kind of just there, and the bullets will just track them. It is insanely fun, and you should definitely try it. But getting back on track, as I mentioned, there's good variety in some of these weapon variants. Some of them are clearly much better than others. You have the Ravager Rebound, which just adds more bounce to all of the Ravager shots and actually makes it much harder to use. But then you have the tracking version of the rocket launcher, which now tracks absolutely everything. Now, I feel like with these weapon variants, 343 could realistically recreate older guns. Let's take the new Bandit Rifle, for example, when that releases. How about they include a variant alongside it, which fires modified needler rounds? The rate of fire of the gun doesn't change, it's exactly the same as the Bandit Rifle, but when you fire enough shots, it now causes a super combine, and then, hooray, 343 have just created the Needle Rifle. Of course, it doesn't look the same, but its function is pretty much identical. Hell, while we're on the topic of recreating older weapons, why not take the Sidekick, expand its reticle, reduce its ammo to about 8 rounds, but increase its damage and slow its rate of fire, and what? You've just recreated the Magnum? No way! I'd honestly find it super interesting if some of the variants they make are just weapons with now a different ammo type. Like literally just take the battle rifle, but now it has heated plasma ammo instead. This technically wouldn't really be any different other than the fact that it's now going to break shields much quicker. Or how about a version of the skewer that has an EMP skewer instead? Every shot it fires completely disables a vehicle for a limited time, just like all the other shock weapons. To balance this out, it could be maybe where it has slightly less damage than the regular version of the skewer, but now it can shock any vehicle. Of course, this would be very annoying to deal with, but super enjoyable to use. How about a version of the Commando that also has shock ammo, which just creates this really insanely annoying shock assault rifle that would do damage over time once enough shots have landed on players? It would just be a faster and more deadly version of the Disruptor. Maybe we could get versions of both the rocket launcher and hydro launcher that whenever they explode on something, it leaves some of that heated plasma residue like the charged Ravager shot. I don't know if any of you remember the Pool of Radiance version of the fuel rod cannon, but that basically left like a pool of plasma on the ground that would damage players if they were close to it. So I guess the new version of the rocket launcher could just be like that. Even if your shot doesn't necessarily hit the player, it's going to leave that pool of energy on the floor that if anyone is standing in, it will hurt them. And then the Hydra version would kind of just be that, but on a weaker scale. Since we mentioned the Ravager, why not a Ravager, but rather than firing normal shots, it literally just fires the charge shot. It wouldn't fire bursts though, it would just fire one shot at a time, but every single shot is that charge shot. We don't even really need to stop at weapon variants. They could implement vehicle variants too, but I feel like these would be a bit harder to implement. I mean, not necessarily. Again, there's the Pelican drops. They can just have it where sometimes it's the variant that's dropped off, and they'd mostly be used for forge stuff anyway. But as of right now, I do see that being a bit more of an unlikely reality. I mean, the variants of the guns in Halo 5 were one of the most enjoyable things about the multiplayer in that. With Forge, you could create some really interesting stuff, and on Warzone, because there was so many different versions, yes, they did exist for monetary reasons, but they were really enjoyable to use in Warzone and in Super Fiesta, so I'd like to see them brought back in full force in Halo Infinite. I know we do already have some, but why stop there? I mean, realistically, this means 343 can technically create new weapons every season, even if some of those aren't completely new and are just versions. These wouldn't even mess with the competitive side of things, as they'd only really be in social modes like Big Team Battle or on Forge stuff. If it is true that we don't get another gun until Season 5, I really hope this is something that 343 considers, as I mean, the possibilities for this concept are infinite. Even if it's just minor changes like taking a weapon and giving it the properties of a different ammo type, like an assault rifle that has hard light rounds. Or maybe a needler that does something similarly to the Prophet's Bane, and whenever you crouch, it gives you active camo. Just some fun, unique weapons that make the game feel a bit more social at times and more enjoyable. But anyway, I feel like I've rambled long enough about the possibility of these weapon variants, so let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you have any ideas for a cool gun that 343 could implement, a cool version of a weapon? Because I bet some of you have some truly unique concepts. Now, I know these aren't exactly a good replacement for actual weapons, and I'm not trying to imply that they would be. I'm just meaning this as sort of an additional thing alongside getting new guns. If we had a little bit of both every season, that would be amazing, but the weapon variants are there as sort of contingency plan for 343. If they can't necessarily get a new weapon out for a specific season, oh well, we can just include some new weapon variants as compensation. But yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.